Really presented quite a bit of information on that and kind of left us thinking, wow, we have quite a bit to do to establish our competitive edge in the Arctic. So I guess I would like to just go ahead and maybe ask for a few comments on the presentation from our panelists. So Dr. Luke, he's pointing to Dr. Close, who is the immediate past chair of the #1 supply chain program in the country, and is a professor there still in the Eli Burrow College of Business. You're very welcome.
I thought it was a very, very interesting presentation. I thought it was a very interesting presentation in terms of the changing flows of supply chain, which is what I represent, because most of us don't understand that the Arctic offers significant opportunities to shorten supply chains. That I had the opportunity this summer, courtesy of the Canadian government, to visit Vancouver and Prince Rupert Sound and see what flows are happening there. That's not quite as far north as you deal with, but it's certainly fairly cold up there in the summer. And the flows of product from Asia to the U.S. And when I've started to talk about it recently, there's a lot of people in the supply chain that are not aware of it. There are an increasing number that are saying, oh yeah, we're just starting to do that, and use that flow from Prince Rupert Sound and Vancouver into the Midwest as an alternative way of having goods go from Asia to the ports of Los Angeles and Oakland. So I think the combination of that and what you talked about was that the changing flows offer a lot of opportunities to change supply chains and also make them more shorter and more fuel efficient.
Thank you. And Dr. Brigham, great presentation, and opened up a lot of interesting areas of discussion. I'm just going to add another dimension to it. Canada and the U.S. are each other's biggest partners, whether you're talking trade, energy, investment, culture, sports. Canada's noted exporter of hockey players and things like that. But we are also, we work very closely together in the Arctic, and both bilaterally and through the Arctic Council, which Dr. Brigham mentioned. And one of the things we've been working on is basically how to build a sustainable economy in the north. And this is a challenge. You've got small communities, isolated, as you heard, pretty minimal infrastructure. And I can't give you dates on when we're going to improve that, but we now have a paved road to the Arctic. Something we wanted for a very long time and opened this year. And you're also dealing with something you're dealing with an area that is incredibly sensitive ecologically. It takes decades for the ecology to recover from something that down here will be recovered by the next year. So we have to be sensitive as we move forward, both keeping in mind the local needs and also keeping in mind that we don't want to create long-term ecological and biodiversity problems. So that's an area where Canada and U.S. have been working. But we've got great opportunities. We've got not a lot of good things you can say about global warming, but it does open up access to natural resources we don't currently have. We've been finding natural resources. I remember way back as a junior officer, I went on a French course. One of the other people on the French course was a Canadian geologist, and he said his colleagues were laughing at him because he said, well, in South Africa they found diamonds in these small circular lakes. Northwest Territories have thousands and thousands of small circular lakes. I think there's diamonds in northern Canada, and everyone thought, you've gone mad. Canada is now, I think, the 4th largest producer of diamonds in the world. But the problem is, when you do this, how do you get some benefit for local communities? And as we go forward, we want to make sure that as we're developing the North, and it's going to be developed, we do it sustainably and with our eyes open on all the consequences. I'll stop there for my opening comments.
Well, I really enjoyed your presentation as well. We talked last night. I have a bunch of questions, but I know people out here do too. I would simply say, first I want to mention that Bruce McEntee, representing Senator Gary Peters, was here. And I wanted to give him a shout out because Senator Peters has worked very hard on things like the Gordie-Howe Bridge and other things, trade with Canada, Great Lakes restoration. I have actually been to the Arctic, different parts of the Canadian Arctic, basically, and was reminded of the important military presence we've had up there, particularly during the Cold War. We still have it, but our jets, Air Force, were all over the different Arctic islands up there, protecting both the U.S. and Canada. In the event there was hostilities. Fortunately, we never had those, but there's still bases up there. I had several questions I wanted to ask you, and I'll just roll them out. Oh, by the way, Canada has worked so hard to create awareness and sensitivity of the Arctic. I served, as was mentioned, ambassador to Canada, and what they do every summer, every June, is they take about 7 or 8 ambassadors up there through Canadian Air Force hospitality. Not as luxurious as you might think. And they fly up there to different places, like a place like called Iqaluit, Pond Inlet, Resolute. So I've seen underground mining up there in the magnetic North Pole and seen a lot. But they're trying very hard to educate all these different ambassadors that serve in Canada, not just from Arctic countries, but from all the countries, as to what's up there. And there's a lot of discussion of it when you're in Canada, living in Canada, much more than here. So it's really interesting. But I have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to just throw a couple out, because we talked about the indigenous people, and of course I met some. I met a young man who was really proud because he'd gone out that winter alone on a snowmobile, actually, or maybe it was a sled. There are a lot of snowmobiles up there, this is an issue, and had killed his first polar bear and brought it back. It was kind of a rite of passage, really interesting. Sometimes they never come back. But how many indigenous people are there in the Arctic region that we need to be sensitive to? I'm also interested in what U.S. federal agencies are most helpful in collecting data and information. And I want you to underscore the dramatic impact of climate change. There are still deniers of this. They're maybe even in the White House. We don't think it's a plot of China, okay? But I think you need to underscore that. We do have a lot of well-informed people here who have friends. And I think your thoughts on that would be most appreciated. You've implied that, you talked about that. And then how are we going to someday adopt the law of the sea?
Oh, those are all easy questions, right? Those are easy ones, right? Well, let's see. The law of the sea, I mean, it would be interesting to see if this administration, because of the Arctic, could be convinced, and the majority of the senators, well, 2/3 vote you need, that during this administration it could be ratified. There's so many issues and problems and challenges that likely won't be on the docket, but you would hope that the United States would ratify in the near-term years ahead. It would help us in our South China Sea issues. It would help us around the planet because it's essential to operation of our Navy and all of our national interests, particularly in the Arctic, where we do have a spot of our seabed. We're conducting our science, but the question is, how do we orchestrate that claim without being a member at the table? So it's a huge issue. It's an ocean issue, but it's central to economic and and military security of the United States. Almost all companies today are supportive of UNCLOS, of the United States ratifying UNCLOS, and certainly all the military chiefs, and I would bet at least 50 senators, but we need more than 50, so we'll see. And the indigenous people, of course, central to the whole of the Arctic, represented, I would say, very well at this intergovernmental forum, the Arctic Council, but it really is the responsibility of each Arctic state, as certainly Canada and the United States, to look after, to further the cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples. Huge issue, different approaches in Canada, and devolving some responsibilities for federal government to the north. Not so much in Alaska, but nonetheless we have our native corporations in Alaska which are thriving and quite bringing in a fair amount of revenue and some wealth sharing in the north. The issue of how many agencies, I mean, lots of federal agencies, the United States, I know in Canada as well, are taking immense amount of data. In the state of Alaska, we also have data being taken on all issues related to indigenous people, health and economic and sustainability, how they use the sustainable use of the seas. But for the federal agencies, huge is the Department of Interior. You all know that most of Alaska is owned by federal government, so a huge presence of federal government onshore in all of Alaska, the terrestrial environment, but of course offshore. You hear now that BOEM, under the Department of Interior, is going to lease offshore, and maybe they'll be allowed leasing and then drilling in ANWR, and of course in the Petroleum Reserve, which is to the west of ANWR. So whether you believe in all of that, and it's good or bad, I think at least the current administration is moving forward. The issues for Alaskans are, I think, and as an informed citizen, I would say maybe we shouldn't drill offshore, but maybe we should drill onshore. I mean, as an oceanographer, I'd say it's probably 100 times more potential for risk and problems in the ocean, but maybe not so much on the land side. But there are many in the lower 48 who would say, well, we're not going to drill in either place. Well, that doesn't leave Alaska in very good stead economically. We're like the Russian Federation in Alaska. What do we got? Resources. And that's what the Russians have in a not diversified economy. Same challenge for Canada in the north. It's not a diversified economy. I mean, you know, diamond mining is all resource driven. So how you do that and share that wealth to indigenous people is a challenge of this century. What was the other question?
I want to understand.
Oh, climate change. Well, I could have any one of the audience of the professors here, particularly my friend Fritz Nelson, talk about the permafrost and change, but in all dimensions, the top of the world is melting at a far faster rate than we might have anticipated. Sea ice, you hear about the Greenland ice cap and its melt rate, and now likely to affect sea level rise even more. So, you know, it was a joke, but it's pretty serious that half of Florida will be underwater sometime at the end of the century, maybe. But what I know about, and what I've been briefed about in this Hydrographic Services Review panel, we went to Norfolk, we had a public hearing, and all of the county people and the state people briefed us all about Norfolk area and Portsmouth area, which you all probably know is the largest naval base on this planet. And it's underwater at least one day a month. In other words, the roadways into this large base are actually underwater, so thousands of people can't get to the base. I mean, that's the practical issue of it. You say, well, the base is not underwater. Well, but all the roads are. Maybe on the average of once a month. So right there, they are, it impacts military security of the United States. So an interesting practical issue that I didn't really know about until we were briefed. What was heartening was that the state and the county officials were all on top of this issue. Dealing with climate change, understanding about climate change made me feel that maybe a greater number of Americans do actually understand the practical issues here. you know, I mean, the data on over any dimension from sea ice to the ice cores in the Arctic and the Antarctic, all of the data shows compelling evidence that this is man-induced and anthropogenic since the Industrial Revolution. So it's unequivocal. The challenges are all adaptation, mitigation, and international context, Paris Agreement, and all of that. Those are the challenges. The challenges are to the great consumer societies. I mean, us, right? I mean, that's the challenge is, can that consumption be sustained in a world driven by hydrocarbons and CO2 emissions? And the question, I mean, is answered is no, but how do we go about it? Good question. I mean, there are many experts in the audience that could answer perhaps better, but start. Was there another question?
No, that's great. I think we should let
I'll let Jack. So one comment I had was, I mentioned just briefly about public-private partnerships, and the challenge for the Arctic states is that should the federal taxpayers, particularly in Canada and the United States, pay for all this stuff? And I think for all the infrastructure, and the answer is likely no, that we do need private investment, that it's for communication systems, for whatever development. I mean, there will be private investment, but how can there be collaborative investment in the infrastructure for support, for safety, for normal communication systems, you name it. But I don't think that I should pay for it as a taxpayer in the United States for all of the development of Alaska. I mean, it's some sort of public-private partnership, I think. Novel and different that we may not be used to in the United States. I mean, should there be foreign investment? And I know both countries have dealt with this. Should China invest in Canada or buy companies? Same for the United States, or should Japan agree? You name the country. Lots of challenges for the sovereign state control of the Arctic lands.
The microphone should be working.
Great. Those are very interesting and challenging questions. But I also see good opportunities ahead of us. And for example, the National Science Foundation has developed 10 big ideas for future investment. One of the big ideas is about navigating the new Arctic. And I think that's very important because when universities like MSU trying to create a new knowledge to understand the complexity of the issues in the Arctic region or other regions, we need to take an interdisciplinary approach, as Lance mentioned earlier. And that's why we are trying to integrate different issues. Rather than just work on one issue at a time, we need to work on all the related issues simultaneously to not just understand the climate change, but also try to convince people to believe it. And that requires deep knowledge and to understand the people's behavior, how to convince people to believe that. Right? There are many reasons. Some people really believe, or deny this, but some people may have, political motivations not for denying those. So there are a lot of reasons. I think as researchers in the universities, we have the obligation and the responsibility to do a better job, to really understand those complex issues, and hopefully we can convince more people to believe in climate change and find good solutions to address those kind of problems. So,
we talk about research and opportunities. The missing, I serve on the Polar Research Board now of the National Academy, and I've served on a lot of panels, and the missing link is always, we got all kinds of information on climate change and data and analysis, but economics, natural resource economics and transport economics, missing really in Arctic research. Some public policy work related to international relations in the Arctic, but very minimal economics and natural resources. And I know you have a natural resource department here, and a really big program historically here, and likely to contribute to to those topics where, with NSF grants and wherever. Because NSF, as you suggest, is kind of opening up. This navigating the new Arctic, of course, it's not necessarily the shipping part of it. It's broadly spoken, but I always say, well, navigating the new Arctic safely, efficiently, minimal impact, etc. I mean, that's how you do this stuff in a sustainable, safe way. But I think economics and natural resource development, and certainly transport economics, is a huge issue to be looked at more.
I was on the National Cabinet Polar Board as well, and what struck me was the fact that, and mostly in our town,
That knocks off about $1,000.
Thank you. I was on the National Academy of Science Polar Research Board as well, and what struck me was the minimal consideration, and this was Antarctica, and I was going to ask you a question related to that, of the transport economics to support research or to support anything. In Antarctica, to what degree, and I would guess it would be better in the Arctic, but how much better, or what are the challenges in the Arctic with transport economics?
Yeah, well, you know, historically, the Polar Research Board has, in fact, focused on Antarctica. But over the last 2 decades, I think it's really back on focusing bipolar interests. For the Arctic, it's a greater understanding of global shipping enterprise and marine economics, and how really is, because of the geography of the place and constraints, it's how the global shipping enterprise can work effectively in the Arctic. So it's a wide open field for sure. But NSF hasn't really tackled those applied issues, and so it's hard to break in. But I see some opening for NSF funding. Of course, there's funding from foundations and others who really, and I've dealt with the MacArthur Foundation and several other foundations, but their focus and interest is on environmental protection and safety issues. But there are opportunities. It'd be interesting how the private sector invest in more research that's related to Arctic. Not easy to do, but the private sector plus maybe the federal government in collaboration there.
Is there any truth to the rumor that President Trump will give Alaska back to Russia in return for a hotel and casino in Moscow? Now that's fake news, folks. That's how things start. There's no truth to it from what I know, but it could be done.
I would say, though, that there's interest. I mentioned it. I serve on this Council on Foreign Relations study, and one of the study was released in March. It is bipartisan effort, and we focus on infrastructure. And the administration is interested in infrastructure related to offshore development and leases, and the infrastructure are ports and intermodal connections. So there is a niche there in this current administration where there is interest in furthering an investment in Alaska related to the marine development. So there's some positive. I mean, setting aside climate change and Paris Agreement and all that, it is recognized that it's economics and infrastructure gaps that are really necessary to be addressed in Alaska.
Will the land bridge ever recreate?
I'll ask one of the geologists here. Yeah, there we go.
I was wondering if I could ask a specific question. A recent thing that's come up now for the second summer that involves both the U.S. and Canada is the Crystal Serenity, the cruise ship that now has done the Northwest Passage twice. I was wondering if you could say anything about that. I know there's a lot of safety concerns related to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah, this crystal, is this working?
Working off my dinner.
Yeah, the Crystal Serenity is an 800-foot cruise ship that carried, I don't know, 800-900 people, I guess, across twice the Northwest Passage. I mean, the question for a person like me studying this is what's it doing there besides making money? And there's no infrastructure to support if something happens. I mean, I think our Canadian colleagues, there have been many meetings with Canada, Transport Canada, and the Canadian Coast Guard about all of this, and with the U.S. Coast Guard before the voyage took place, the 2 voyages. But it's actually likely that these large ship voyages will not happen in the future, as in fact even Crystal is building specialized, smaller expeditionary ships that are built to Pole class standards. So I don't think we'll see through the Northwest Passage a large cruise ship like this again anytime soon. I mean, Canada wanted, I think, just my impression, wanted to exercise that the ship could sail across based upon a fairly ice-free voyage. But in fact, Crystal on both voyages had a trailing smaller ship as a support ship. So you don't see that in many of the pictures. But so that's part of the deal, I think, to allow the ship to cross the Canadian waters through the Canadian archipelago. Was in fact they had their own ship with them to support ice-breaking, ice-capable ship owned by and operated by the British Antarctic Survey, in fact, under charter. So it happened safely, showed it could be done. But if you had 1,000 voyages of cruise ships in the summer, I think it would be more of an issue, a challenge maybe, without the attendant full range of infrastructure and services. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, this was a bit controversial. The biggest concern was, what if something goes wrong? You don't have a very easy infrastructure that can swoop in and save them. But it also did, on the other hand, open up some interesting vistas. There was I saw a program on television where they talked about a local community. The ship stopped, and what did they do with the passengers, and how did they interact? And there's no rum bars in the Northwest Territories. You don't have an international diamonds place where you can go and get watches. But they introduced them to the local indigenous community, showed them how they live, sold some arts and crafts, and then the community was, on the whole, very positive about it. Some questions, whether it's going to happen again. It was a major undertaking for Crystal Serenity. I think they had to put up a huge bond in case the government of Canada had to deploy massive resources to go up and save them. But, it does open it up. And since he made a political joke, I'm going to make one too. It's not so much a joke. The Northwest Territories, which is majority Indigenous, Inuit, Métis, has a unique government structure. They do not have political parties. They have one government, people are elected, and they cooperate, and they get things done. I'm not saying that should apply to either the Canadian or U.S. federal government. It's just something for people to think about.
We can always learn from other cultures, can't we? But I did want to ask you, Doug, because I know how sensitive Canadian public officials are in the public to the Indigenous people, often referred to as Inuit. How many are there? I was trying to get that number out. How many are there, at least as Canadian citizens? Because I know how hard everybody's working to worry about their health, their opportunities, their security. What do you think the number is?
Thank you for answering that question, which I don't have the answer for. But I will talk a bit to it. As I said, in the north, the majority of the population are Indigenous. But we also have Indigenous communities all across Canada, and they do have some major challenges. There's ongoing land claims, there's social problems, these isolated communities, there's been a spate of teenage suicides, and people are working together to try and resolve it. But on the actual numbers, I will send you an email.
10,000 to 20,000? It's not a lot of people.
No, I think the Arctic, our territories have, I think the Northwest Territories has a total of 50,000 people, roughly, in population, in an area, I don't know, a quarter the size of the United States. So it's to say sparsely populated. There's one dot, whereas if you're down in population zone, you look at New York City, it's a giant blob on a population map. Northwest Territories has a single dot. So, but it's one of the richest, potentially very rich part of Canada. And by the way, if any of you are thinking of getting engaged, Canadian diamonds actually have a very small laser printed indication that they are not blood diamonds. Just look with a microscope at the tiny polar bear.
Yes.
So the Canadian Ice Service and the National Ice Center, they both put out ice maps of icebergs, ice concentration. So with increasing transportation in the Arctic, is there any responsibility to bear, or will there be an increase in responsibility to bear with these centers putting out this data?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be greater demand for maybe more timely information, which really requires more satellite coverage and more data input for the analysis. The United States has historically operated, as you know, the Naval Ice Center, which is the U.S. Ice Center. But we're actually seamlessly connected, where today I think even the Canadian Ice Service does some ice charting for the Great Lakes as well. So there's a seamless, I mean, this is a good example of very close tie between the two ice centers, where they're in fact call themselves the North American Ice Center. Now the only quirk is that the United States Ice Center does all ice charting in Antarctica, principally so that the U.S. Navy knows where the ice edge is and where ships that go down there and support. But all the cruise ships down in Antarctica use those ice charts too. But the North American Ice Center is a good example of collaborative union between our two countries, and that's happened over the past 5 years, I guess. Good question.
I have a personal question. How did you, Lawson, how did you decide you wanted to go into the Coast Guard and end up with this incredible specialty and expertise? I mean, tell us where you were born. How did you get in the Coast Guard? What is that all about?
Yeah, it is interesting. The American military, or the Canadian military, whatever military you serve in, gives you these extraordinary opportunities to serve around the world. But I grew up on an island east of New York, about 100 miles out, a place called Shelter Island. My father's a boat builder. And, but the real tie is I had an uncle who graduated from the Coast Guard Academy. So my mother's brother graduated from there, and when I was a young kid, I went to his graduation in the 50s. Said this was a place, it's hard to get into, but I lucked out, got in. Not an easy place, but it does provide opportunities. And when I was a faculty member at the Coast Guard Academy, I had a chance to go to Greenland on an icebreaker and do some science and climb on the glaciers and use a new laser device to measure the movement of glaciers. And then I was captain of the icebreaker on the Great Lakes. And so I got into the ice business, so to speak, and the whole region's research. And so we took it from there. The most gratifying and interesting work has been with the Arctic Council, and working with the Arctic states, and working with Russian experts and Canadian experts, all on this marine safety environmental protection study. So it just grew from my operational maritime experience, having been lived on the water and in the water most of my life. It's a bit too far from the water for me here, although you have a nice little river to canvas. But even in Alaska, where I live, I look up and see 4,000 foot mountains, but I can see Cook Inlet in the distance, but no vessels on Cook Inlet because of rise and fall of tide. It's I don't know, 40 feet or so. But anyway, it's a good question, and been tied to the sea and operated ships at both ends of the world. Just a unique and extraordinary opportunity, just from a kid from a small town in Long Island.
We're closing in on our time here today. But absolutely, I want to extend a thank you to all of you for being here. A special thank you to Dr. Brigham for such good information. It's has opened up a whole new world of opportunities for us here in our university and on our campus. Dr. Brigham will be visiting with faculty throughout the next couple of days. It's National Geography Week, right? So it's very appropriate for his visit to come this week, and he's going to be participating in a geography colloquium on Friday. We look forward to that. I also want to thank our panelists for their contribution to our discussion today. Good questions, very informative answers to those questions, and I hope that the discussions will keep going on our campus and with collaborators. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have people here from the state of Michigan, we have a few private sector folks, pretty diverse audience in and of yourself. So thank you for being here, and again, can I give a thank you for our panelists and Dr. Burgess.